Hey everybody, it's Henry W. Steele. In this video, I want to talk to you about Robert Gordon's Radium Ray. The Radium Ray, the famous Radium Ray, which actually only shows up in the book a few times. Fewer than, I think it's like 5 times or something like that. It's a small thing, kind of like the Tokyo J1, so it's easier to collect all the information on, or at least all the apparent information on it. In my forum, there was a little discussion about the Radium Ray, a little bit of a few posts back and forth. And I had already been thinking about doing a video about the Radium Ray, but I was like, you know what, this would be a good time to do one. So that's what I'm doing, a video about the Radium Ray. Now, I'm not actually going to tell you what my conclusions are, but I am going to show you a couple of things. Number one, that having background information, studying things like mythology, astronomy, astrology, numerology, things of that nature is important, because when you have that background information that's already known to you, things tend to stick out a little bit differently than they would otherwise. So let's go ahead and look up radium in the book. So it'll bring us the Radium Ray. Now, I've seen a lot of places where people say the Radium Ray is in fact the planet Mercury, which, hey, maybe it actually is. I don't know. I have to think about that one. Let's go to page 345 here, 345. And this is where Robert has just completed another new invention, which he called the Radium Ray. Now, the reason people think that the Radium Ray is in fact Mercury is because radium has an atomic number of 88. And of course, Mercury orbits the sun in 88 days. But there's more going on here, so it could be pointing in several directions all at once, or in several different directions, some to confuse you, some to not. Who knows, right? You have to study it and figure this out. Now, we see here, this is in chapter 30, by the way. We see here that on Thanksgiving night, November 24th, the attack was ordered. Stuff goes on, and then the Radium Ray is mentioned. With the ray, he could locate anything in the sky 75 to 100 miles away. He had the Radium Ray machine in readiness to search the sky for the first attack that night. Just before 10 o'clock, he was sweeping the sky with the Radium Ray. So we'll use this time in conjunction with this date right here. So the first thing that comes to mind, and everybody should be looking at this kind of stuff if they're trying to study this book, is to look up when Thanksgiving was in 1931, because this part takes place in 1931 in Gann's novel. And it turns out that November 24th is actually a Tuesday, and Thanksgiving is always on a Thursday. So Thanksgiving is actually on November 26th this year. And so Gann was giving us the date here that was not Thanksgiving. So the question becomes, because this, first you have to realize that you need to look at this kind of stuff. Second, with the knowledge that you have to look at this kind of stuff, you see, wait a minute, Gann either made a mistake here, or he's either trying to point to November 24th, or he's trying to point to the actual November 26th Thanksgiving night, or he's trying to make a comparison between the two of these, or he's using Thanksgiving night as the actual night to use some of this stuff with, and then using November 24th as the actual night to use some of this other stuff with. So there's a few possibilities there. So all it actually does at this point is raise more possibilities. But anyway, let's look up radium, shall we? Because radium, we have the hindsight of Gann's 1909 Ticker and Investment Digest article where he refers to elements and electrons and things of that nature. So we know that he's thinking, or he has thought along those lines before, of elements. So it would seem to be important that he named one of his inventions after an element. Now, to just the average reader, they would think, oh, that's just late 1920s science fiction garbage right there, but it's probably important. Now, before I go further in looking at radium, I want to point one thing out here, a logical conclusion, at least to me. So, it says that this is an invention. So if Gann really wrote this book with codes and hid stuff in here, and he really does think of himself as being like Robert Gordon, or I should say more along the lines of he thinks Robert Gordon, he created a character to be like him, it would stand to reason that any of the inventions that Robert Gordon actually made would be techniques or calculators or something that Gann created, or he was the first person to apply to the markets, at least openly. So basically the idea would be if there's an invention by Robert Gordon that in Gann's mind, it was something that he came up with. So it would either have to be something like, the circle of 24, square of 52, square of 67, square of 90, squares, that kind of thing. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something that he invented, but it could be something that he was the first person to use it that way, or at least publicly in the public record, he was the first person to use it. So with that in mind, it would stand to reason that the radium ray could not be just mercury. It would at the very least have to be mercury being used in a specific way. Okay? But now let's look up radium. Boom. Radium. Radium is a chemical element with the symbol of Ra, capital R, small a, and an atomic number of 88. And that right there is why everyone automatically connects it to Mercury, because Mercury orbits the sun in 88 days. It is the sixth, excuse me, it is the sixth element in group 2 of the periodic table, also known as the alkaline earth metals. Okay. Now, let's look at a periodic table. Here are the alkaline earth metals, and this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's the sixth one in that group. And we see here 88, Ra. But then we see down here, and this is where knowing information such as the planetary orbital periods is important, because the atomic mass of radium is 226. The atomic number is essentially the number of protons in the nucleus, in theory, where the atomic mass is all the different particles put together. So this number is very close to the orbital period of Venus, the planet Venus. Venus orbits the sun in just a hair under 225 days. So Gann may have been using this to point to Mercury being used with Venus. That's a possibility, okay? So that's something we need to keep in mind. But this is where this knowledge comes in handy again. If you look at the atomic symbol, it's Ra, or Ra, the god, the Egyptian god Ra, the sun god, right? So let's look that up, shall we? Because this Ra might have been what Gann was pointing to. It might not have been 88 or 26 at all. So if we look at Ra here, most important gods, one of the most important gods in ancient Egyptian religion, identified primarily with the noon sun. In later Egyptian dynasties, he was merged with Horus. He was believed to rule all parts of this created sky, the earth, underworld, all that kind of stuff. He was synonymous with the falcon, and he was commonly depicted with the head of a falcon. And here we see the common depiction of Ra right there. So we need to keep that in mind, as maybe it could be that this is something that Gann was wanting to point to. So at this point, we have a possibility of pointing to Mercury and Venus, possibly the sun at noontime, possibly, Ra as he was with Horus. I mean, there's different possibilities. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Astrolog here and go back in time to 1931, Thanksgiving 1931, so we can look at a horoscope of that day. 31, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, and then back to the 24th, because that's the actual date that was in the book. And now I'm going to make it, actually that was pretty much perfect. I'm going to make it just before 10 p.m. So 9:58 p.m. because that was the time in the book, correct? Thanksgiving night, November 24th. Let's see. Where did I see that? Just before 10 o'clock, he was sweeping the sky with the radium ray. Okay. So, let's look back here. What we see here is very, very interesting. There is Mercury and Venus conjunct in the sky. So that's a possibility of what Gan may have been referencing. And we see that the sun is over here. It's in the same constellation. Excuse me. The same constellation of Sagittarius right here that this is happening in. And it is a full moon. The moon is in opposition almost perfectly at this point in time. So that's pretty interesting. So it's a full moon. So that's a possibility to look at that because the moon obviously works with the sun. Now, this is November 24th, but if we go to the actual date of Thanksgiving, we have Tuesday, November 24th. The actual date is Thursday, the 26th. We see that now the moon is in opposition to the conjunction of Mercury and Venus. So pretty much all the relationships stayed the same, except the moon changed relationships here and is now in opposition of Mercury and Venus. Now let's go back really quickly and look at radium. Let's see. Radium was discovered by Madame Curie. Let's see. Alkaline earth metals decays ionizing. It's fluorescent, meaning it glows in the dark. So that might be a point. I mean, that could be pointing to something like the moon. Let's see, it is pure radium is a silvery white. That could be a reference to the moon, right? But it readily reacts with nitrogen rather than oxygen. That's pretty interesting, just on a scientific standpoint. On exposure to air, forming a black surface layer. That's very interesting. So it's silvery white like the moon, but corrodes and looks black. So that is interesting. Not that that does or doesn't have anything to do with anything, but these are the kind of things that you might be looking for. Now, let's go back to Tunnel. Bring our book back up here. Now, again, having knowledge of stuff helps us here. Brings things to the forefront. Now, remember, Ra, if I can say that correctly, was basically associated with the falcon. And if we look at constellations of a falcon, the constellation Aquila, the eagle, is visible in the northern sky. In ancient Egypt, Aquila possibly was seen as the falcon of Horus. So it's entirely possible that Gan may have been attempting to, in lieu of other things, pointing us to this constellation, possibly, or in conjunction with other things. Now, if we look at a map of the night sky and zoom in here a little bit, we find Aquila is in Capricorn and Sagittarius. It's about 2/3 into Capricorn and 1/3 into Sagittarius, but it's about 10 degrees into Sagittarius right here. And if we go back to our November 26th and even November 24th, we see that Mercury and Venus are conjunct each other on these two dates, both of these dates, and they're in the constellation Aquila. So that could be of significance. Now, also something that could be pointed out as a possibility of significance is the fact that this is in the 9th constellation, and constellation has 12 houses, or not constellation, the zodiac has 12 houses or signs, just like a clock. And in the book here, it says just before 10 o'clock, which could be a reference to the time, quite obviously. Or it could just as easily be a reference to the fact that he's talking about this conjunction right before the 10th sign. I mean, that's a possibility, right? So these are all things that we need to look at and consider when working with the radium ray. I mean, there's a lot going on here. It's not just the possibility of Mercury. We've got Mercury, maybe Venus, maybe the moon, maybe the sun, a place in the sky, right? Time of day, all these different things right here become important. I'm not going to go into too much details, but this is essentially, this conjunction is happening right at the galactic center also. So that could be of significance and importance. I'll let you do research on that if you find it interesting enough to do so. So we've got all these different things here to look at, all these different possibilities. So, I mean, also we have, with this ray, he could locate anything in the sky 75 to 100 miles away. If you add 75 to 100, you get 175. Divide it by 2, you get 87.5, which is right at that 88, that radium, you know, the number 88 right there. So it could very well be that he's wanting us to look at Mercury. I mean, there's all these different possibilities. It could also be other things going on here that we could be looking at. Possibility of, what if we change this to a 75-degree aspect? We don't really see much of anything going on here. Heliocentrically, we don't see Mercury and Venus together, so I don't know that he would have been pointing at that. There is a possibility of a 100-degree aspect. We can look for that, like this. We see that we had really close here, something here. Squares are 90 degrees, but if we change it so it's 87.5 degrees, we get a difference, excuse me, where there's a difference in the Sun and Neptune, or Saturn and Uranus right there. So there's different possibilities showing up here to look at right here. There's also the numbers, just flat out numbers, not astrological or astronomical correlations that are possible. I mean, I'll let you go ahead and read through this because it takes time obviously to go through all this, but notice he said that there was a large flock of them flying at very high altitude, and that would seem to go towards the Aquila thing, quite possibly because let's see, this area of the sky here with Aquila has most of the birds that are in constellations up around this area, or this section of the zodiac. So that would be something for you guys to also look into. So there's quite a bit going on here. So if this is an invention, and the inventions are things that Gann used that, you know, no one else really used, at least openly at that point in time, then, and if it is pointing to all this astrological stuff, then it would have to be used in a way that's not normal or abnormal to regular astrology, one would think. It's also entirely possible that this has something to do with a square or a circle chart, things of that nature, and try and put that together there. I mean, there's a lot to look at here, but you see that there are definite connections that can come into play very quickly just by doing some quick and easy research. And like I said through this whole thing, the more you know about astrology, astronomy, mythology, numerology, the elements, the dynamic periodic, or I'm sorry, the periodic table, I'm looking at the tab here, all that kind of stuff, these kinds of things are going to stick out to you and look more and more obvious. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and end the video here, and I will leave it to you guys and gals out there if you want to look into this more. There's quite a bit here to look at, and it's not actually all that hard to dig into, especially the radium ray. So I will talk to you guys in my next video.